Rick and Morty vs. Dungeons & Dragons 2, Issue 3. We start out in 1993 at the house of one of Jerry's friends when he was a teenager about to play D&D for the first time. This is definitely padding. I can understand doing this for Rick, but Jerry? We see Mario 1 on the TV. He's told off for reading the stats because he's not the Dungeon Master. Oh, God forbid they actually know what they're doing. He's interested in the lore of D&D, reading out the pretentiously formal history that's unfortunately italicized, making it harder to convince me to read it. Basically, he says there was a war that was fought between two species. Wars are most of real history. The Dungeon Master says that those species names were the weird names they gave to devils and demons to try to convince parents that D&D is not a Satan's game. Jerry thinks it's kinda cool. I'm glad they use different names to distance it from that. The Dungeon Master mocks the names because they have apostrophes and flicks something at Jerry, overthinking things as he insists that it'd be harder to pronounce the name of Teneri than it'd look. And a part of Jerry's paper ends up getting a hole in it, as I wonder why Jerry had to be so unlucky that he even got bullied by his D&D friends. If they don't like him, why'd they invite him? He was really lonely to keep putting up with him after 1 second, but I wouldn't. Summer hits the monster threatening Jerry with arrows. Fortunately, Jerry lampshades how lucky Summer was that been accurate. The monster's pretty big and was staying still, so I don't see how she'd have to be that lucky. It turns out the monsters are being summoned by Sorcerer-Rick, of course. If they were their own independent entities, that'd be more interesting. While Sorcerer-Rick's facing away from him, Morty jumps off the roof at him and smacks him with a lamp, and Summer tells Beth to back up the car. Meanwhile, we see Rick get called to quit that shit because he said it to a villager saying greetings name. And he says he can't believe he fell for that old joke. He wishes he finished this place as someone says the fresh produce is only insert price here. A ripoff of Tiny Tim asks for money and Rick kills him instead of simply leaving because he's in a bad mood. He fortunately lampshades things. Though it's not as good as the writer not making us have to put up with cliche shit at all. I don't know what's worse, the generic garbage I wrote intending to fill it in later, or the worthless final dialogue I put in thinking it was even remotely genre appropriate. He complains that he has no XP. You mean EXP? I said EXP at first. Does D&D insist on not having the E there, even though experience starts with E? I guess that's smart, because removing one letter makes it faster to say, even if it's an inaccurate excuse for an acronym that way. Then he meets Dungeon Dave because he wanted an adventure, and he's happy and says he forgot all about him. He asks Rick how he could forget someone he never met before. Unfortunately, he calls him Wizard Rick when he's corrected on his name. It still annoys me that he's talking in old-fashioned English. That's just distracting and makes the dialogue harder to get through, as in type down for me to say. He says that if Rick's a man of valor, he needs bugbear pelts from a cave's animals to insulate his cottage. Rick humors him and gets given something, which just says player map goes here, because younger Rick never felt like completing the player handout map. So he goes into the cave, lighting up the way, and complains about wearing itchy linen. I guess it is realistic that after all the stuff he remembered, his memory of decades ago would only go so far, and he'd forget the stuff he put in the cave, like swinging traps. It's already kind of a miracle he remembered so much. Morty forces Sorcerer Rick into the car while he's dazed and threatens him with a butter knife, trying to get him to tell them how to get rid of the monsters. Why does he doubt that he could hurt him? He'd only have to aim for the eyes or the mouth. As the car is being chased, it drives off a bridge or something and crashes, and while the family's injured, they're okay. So they think they don't have much time and decide to go shopping to help themselves level up. Rick's greeted by a paladin, and he snaps his fingers, and he touches his shield and electrocutes him. He takes off his helmet, calling him more pathetic than Doofus Rick, and then because reality ensues and he actually hears the chuckling thief behind him, he elbows him and smacks him with a staff, calling him out, chuckling before executing a killing blow. He gets offended at being called old and kills them both to level up. I assume his lack of experience points is the only excuse for why he can't simply create a portal and go home and be such a wizard. You'd think all he'd have to do is imagine a portal home and wave his hand around. But no, I guess the D&D gods of this world are really picky and require the wizards to kill enough people to get more powerful first. Shit, wouldn't that mean that every powerful wizard in that world would have to be an evil mass murderer? Either the gods are evil, or they're idiots for not getting rid of that limitation. Meanwhile, Beth called out for stealing stuff from the shop when her credit card was declined. And she fortunately says it's just a temporary loan based on whether they live or die. Jerry's pragmatic, telling them to take what they can find, and after a waste of time, we see Rick confront a cleric Rick, who's of course cynical. Oh, and female for no reason. The text box says priests of D&D gods are just angry power babies. And based on what I just said about the D&D gods, maybe it has a point. But why does it say priest and not priestess if it's a girl? Rick uses a spell to blind him and smacks her into something over and over. Rick's faced with Warrior Rick, who's actually good, as Rick admits. And the reason he got rid of him was that he gave his character a mean-talking sword, who ends up killing him for Rick as a punishment for missing and going for the headshots. This is like an evil Caliburn. He calls him a moron for vorpling himself. I wish they weren't fighting a monster that wasn't immune to non-magical attacks if, apparently, Beth and Morty being able to damage it doesn't make sense to Jerry. Annika's horrified at the carnage of Rick's family fighting for their lives. Go figure, Morty gets unlucky with the girl because his life happens to suck. Rick has to go to another cave with lava around it. I guess his wizardness protects him. Jerry makes a speech to try to motivate a bunch of people in the D&D roleplay store to fight the monsters outside, telling them that the world's being threatened with conquering. He says something he probably wanted to say for a long time, so that's cool. We can't rely on the Ricks of the world to solve our problems. Ricks create these fucking problems, and then we have to fix them every time. Realistically, there's a person named Rick here, and he asks if he's being talked about. And Beth says he's just projecting. A lot of the time, Rick fixes the problems he causes. Jerry's asked if he's a cop or army vet, because they want to know if he's qualified to organize a defensive operation. He reveals that he memorized every page of the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition Monster Bestiary. Why can't it just be called Bestiary? So much faster! Yeah, he is the expert here, good for him. Normally I'd say he memorized a bunch of useless knowledge, when if he was capable of memorizing a book, he should have memorized the French-English dictionary while he was at it instead or something. But this was more useful to him here. Lucky for Jerry, the people actually follow Jerry's orders. I guess it makes sense because they already saw a monster, so they had no choice but to believe Jerry's explanation. They were desperate. They build barricades with modern stuff and ready traps as Beth pours gasoline on the floor and Annika makes a spike pit. And we see some weapons get sharpened. It's brave of Jerry to admit that he can't do something. He admits he can't boil an egg right. With that, the story ends with Barbara Rick heading towards him in a wheelchair with monsters on either side of him. It's impressive that she has a wheelchair when she's from a medieval world. This issue is about Rick progressing in his D&D adventure, defeating various versions of himself with his magic, while his family uses stuff from a D&D shop to fight monsters, and even ends up convincing the customers to build barricades and traps against Barbara Rick. Which was a cool moment for Jerry as he used his expertise to earn their respect. The story about Rick's family was more interesting to watch, while Rick was just killing over and over, repetitively. It was creative looking that Rick used the blindness spell. That is standard in RPGs, I know it's a case in Sword and Mana, but it's just more interesting than Elemental spell. Are there any limits on what kind of magical spell D&D players can think up? If not, that's pretty overpowered. Why doesn't everyone play Wizard then? This issue was kinda good. The focus was on excitement, as even Beth and Jerry were in danger and had to drive off a bridge in a car. Good thing it was explained that they had airbags to keep them in fighting shape, which just barely justifies things. I still can't help but wonder if it's realistic for them to be even alive after their car took such a fall.